Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Saturday, January 1st. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Rose Bowl game against Utah is today, the game against Michigan in 330 days. Happy New Year, everyone. It is 2022. We are in the future. I assume flying cars can't be far behind. Earlier this week on a show with Kevin Noon, we talked about how thin the Buckeyes are at a number of positions heading into that Rose Bowl game, but we kind of held back on discussing two of the most interesting spots in the defense, the linebackers and the safeties. And that is because I knew my guest today would have some pretty detailed thoughts on both of those and what it would all mean in the Rose Bowl. So his name is Ross Fulton. He is Buckeye Scoop's X's and O's guru. Ross, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here, Tom.
So Kevin Wilson told us on Wednesday that they were moving Cade Stover over from tight end to linebacker for this game. He was there for the Michigan game, but that's not necessarily a permanent move. So is that a function of just how thin they are at linebacker on the whole? Does that suggest to you that they might not be running a 4-2-5 against Utah? Like what does that tell you?
Yeah, so both, right? So they are thin. In particular, they don't have a Sam linebacker, right? So, to back it up a second, last year they had a Sam linebacker. That was Baron Browning. That caused them issues because, again, most of the time you face 11 personnel. And so you've got, a tight end, but then you also have basically, let's say your most basic, you have a tight end and a flanker to one side and two wide receivers or twins to the other. And so most defenses now run a 4-2-5. And so you've taken out the Sam linebacker who used to be the overhang over the tight end, and you've put in a nickel, or State calls it the cover safety. There's all kinds of titles for it. So that guy is kind of over the slot. A more technical term for him is a field apex or a field overhang, right? And so it has similar responsibilities in some ways to what a Sam linebacker would do. But so if you do that and you get into, but if you go back in time, then again, if you're playing a team who uses, a lot of 12 personnel or two tight ends, three tight ends, you've now taken that slot receiver out and put in another tight end. So now you have another gap you have to deal with in the run game. It's obviously closer to the line of scrimmage. And so defensively, you kind of want to go back in time as well and have a Sam linebacker, which I say didn't have. They went from last year having a bunch of two Sam linebackers and no nickels, to now having a bunch of nickels and no Sam linebacker. And so, Cade Stover is sort of an old school, defensive end, outside linebacker, hybrid type Sam linebacker. And so they need his body type to just essentially set the edge against those multiple tight end looks.
So, and let's just, every once in a while, I like to circle back on this stuff. When Ross says 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, you have five skill guys other than your quarterback. That number 11, 12, 13 tells you the first digit is the number of running backs on the field. The second digit is the number of tight ends on the field. And then you can subtract those from five and you end up with the number of wide receivers. So 11 personnel is one running back, one tight end. 12 is one running back, two tight ends. You get it. So just in case anyone's wondering about some of the verbiage there. With the guys who are not here up front, Haskell Garrett has opted out. We have not seen Antwuan Jackson at practice. Cody Simon has not been around. How big of a deal is that going to be to you for the Ohio State defense against what should be a pretty tough physical Utah rushing attack?
So it is and it isn't. I mean, Haskell Garrett's been their best defensive interior player for sure this year. So you're taking that away. I personally don't think Teron Vincent has played all that well this year. I think Tyleik Williams has been pretty good when he's gotten to play, but he kind of disappeared in the last half of the year. So I presume that he will get more opportunities. You're cutting down depth, obviously, as well. They like to play 2 to 3 guys at each of those, both the one technique nose guard and 3 technique defensive tackle spots. And so now you're running it thin. I mean, if we go back to our previous conversation or the last question, I mean, I think the way they're going to try to deal with this is just overwhelm Utah with big bodies in the box. I think it's sort of a, sort of the anti-Michigan plans, right? So, and that's partially by design. So there's been lots of complaints about Ohio State not using 3 linebackers against Michigan. And that's true to some extent. When they were too tight, you could have brought in a bigger body for your cover safety again. So you're these are sort of your your widget positions on the board, so to speak. Like those overhangs are really where you can kind of manipulate what kind of body types you have in there. You can go from anything from like a Sam linebacker to having a cornerback there essentially, because, just depending on what the offense is doing. And so but that said, like, Michigan use RPOs, et cetera. So, but they did get run on a lot. And I think Ohio State will probably try to make up to some extent for the lack of depth inside, the lack of linebackers by playing heavier personnel. Like Kate Stover, I continue to think that someone like Court Williams might also play at that spot. So like, this is where I know people get confused by this. And this is partially like the defensive change, right? So we got 3 safeties now. And like when they were 1 high, you can think about it. I don't know if people can see this. Let's see. This is my pass coverage glossary from Cameron Soren. Great book. Highly recommend it. Gave my shout out. But like they used to be a 1 high defense, right? So you used to have 2 apexes. So like this was the bullet towards the tight end. So that was Ronnie Hickman, Court Williams. That was the cover safety. So now when they've gone to play more 2 high, they've moved the bullet back to the boundary safety. And so that's now more traditional. And so that forces this cover safety spot to become more involved in the run fit, because obviously, like by definition, you've taken one person that was near the line of scrimmage and put him back. And so you have to push everything over. And so this guy goes from, and so this now becomes what used to be like the Sean Wade type, where he was like, you could just worry about covering the slot receiver. Now you need someone more versatile there at times. And so again, I expect maybe someone, so that's why you bring in Kate Stover at that spot, or you bring in Court Williams. Again, you just depending on what personnel groups you get from Utah.
So on the back end of the defense, Sevyn Banks is not here. He was not at practice. And then during Ohio State's practice posted that he was eating wings in Orlando or something. So probably safe to say Sevyn Banks is not going to be playing this weekend. They should, though, have their top pair of corners, Cam Brown, Denzel Burke. Given Utah's offense, just the way they run their offense and the fact that they're maybe a little more dependent on tight ends and running the ball than, bombs away to the wide receivers, it feels like that, maybe to me, that might be enough to get the Ohio State defense kind of through this game, just having those 2 corners and not having that third guy necessarily to rotate in.
Yeah. And, I always have thought that third, like rotating corners is like a luxury, not a necessity. I mean, lots of places just play their 2 corners. Ohio State played their 2 corners in 2019 and played well on defense. So yeah, I think they'll be fine there, especially like, I guess if more comes into play to be honest, if like Marcus Williamson is not available, because like he and Latham Ranson had been rotating at that cover safety. And again, they were trying to use them as like sort of gradations of different times and purposes. And so, you've got, now you're taking him out. So again, that's like all the more reason that you're probably going to want to have some bigger bodies that can come in against bigger personnel, as opposed to, trying to play Latham Ranson there, 70 snaps banging away against multiple tight ends.
So we were talking offline earlier this week, and you said you were thinking, and it might have been a little tongue in cheek, about writing something, just laying out, okay, here are the different safety spots. Here are the players who play at them. Because, it's just, you hear safety, it's like, is this interchangeable? No, it is very much not interchangeable in the Ohio State defense. Can you just sort of explain, we'll just do this real quick, the different spots and who plays where? Because it's, you see people say, why are they not playing Court? Why are they playing Bryson Shaw when they have Court Williams? And so, well, that's not really the same spot. So can you sort of explain where, who fits where?
Yeah. So I'm going to pull this back up, cognizant of the fact people are listening and maybe not all watching. So I'll also talk as I show. Okay. So here we have like your stereotypical at the bottom. I'm showing like a stereotypical 4-2-5 against 11 personnel. So you have, let's say in theory, a tight end and a flanker to the boundary. Most offenses put their passing strength to the field. So the 2 wide receivers, and you put your tight end and your flanker to the boundary there. So now you have 3 safeties, right? So we start at let's say the back boundary safety. So if you're looking online, this guy right here, but that is now Ronnie Hickman. Court Williams has been his backup. So and this is why it does get confusing for people too, I will say, is because the bullet, quote unquote, was originally, if I'm looking at the one above here, when 1 high, he was in fact sort of like at a tight end hybrid spot. Like the bullet in their 1 high old defense used to always go to the tight end side. And so that's why they kind of called him a hybrid, because he had run responsibilities. but they turned that guy into more just like a traditional boundary safety. Now that boundary safety spot, by the way, like defenses work, has to be more involved against the run than this field safety spot, which I'll get to in a minute. So you still want someone there who's more of a run defender. Okay. So again, Hickman, Court Williams, and I'll say where I think Court Williams is going to play later. This field safety spot. So again, often over twins or 2 wide receivers or trips, 3 wide receivers. That was Josh Proctor and now Bryson Shaw. And that person is more often going to have pass coverage responsibilities. He's going to like be, it's really a pass first defender. Like you're capping routes from the multiple wide receiver side or playing as a robber. You're definitely, it's not always true, but as a general rule, you're less involved against the run than the safety to the short side of field. Then the third safety, the cover safety, is this. It's marked as an A on here, which just means apex, because you're literally apexing between the wide receiver and the tackle if you're thinking about on a field. But that has been Marcus Williamson, Latham Ranson. And so, that was the position people used to call a slot corner at times for Ohio State. It's, again, more someone who traditionally for them was more responsible in man coverage for the slot receiver. And this is where some of like the transition costs have come into play in terms of how they've changed the defense after Oregon, because now that person is more involved in like covering the wide flats, but also has more run responsibilities. And so that's why I say, like, a lot of times at that position, this could also be a Sam linebacker. Like last year, that would have been a Sam linebacker out there for Ohio State. And so like, that's where I could see them putting someone like a Court Williams more this game, because you are counting on that position now, especially like when you have 2 high defenders, that like field overhang, let's call it, to play the run. And so yeah, there's very different and distinct responsibilities between the 3 safety spots, which is like, it's like saying, well, you could just move Zach Harrison to nose tackle. Like, no, there's like distinct body types and responsibilities for each of these positions. And so it's not like, even just in terms of, even beyond like body type and like what your strengths and weaknesses are as a player, you have to like learn the different position, right? Like they have distinct rules. And so all that's to say that, like, obviously there's been a lot of angst amongst the Ohio State fan base and others about the amount that Bryson Shaw has played this year as the field safety. Like, some extent warranted, some unwarranted. I mean, they don't ask him to do a lot in the run game. He's just basically like a pass defender, but like they did try to play different guys there. But the problem was, like, they had Latham Ranson there for a month and he was rotated, and they moved Cam Martinez there, but like those guys hadn't played the position. So again, you're trying to like pick things up on the fly. And so, as I said, I think going against Utah, then the more you see more tight ends, more running backs, the more you want bigger bodies at that overhang position, if you will. The safeties stay the same, but then you can change things up at that guy who's sort of between outside of the tight end or offensive tackle.
I think one of the big unanswered questions, or maybe just not fully answered questions at this point, is how much of a role Jim Knowles is going to have on this game. He doesn't officially start until January 2nd, so he is officially not going to be sitting in the booth calling the defense. So do you have any sense for how much he's been involved in the game plan? Is there something, and I guess maybe even more instructive, is there something that people at home, as they're watching the game, can look at and point at their, like the gif of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV and be like, oh, that's a Jim Knowles thing, right? Like,
yeah,
some kind of a sign that he's, been involved in the process, and maybe a little bit of a hint at what's to come.
Yeah. So I think I would, if you see a stack alignment with a, Zach Harrison or Jack Sawyer lined up directly behind the nose guard, so like over the center, right behind the nose guard, which is like a technique that Knowles likes to include to mess with blocking assignments. That would be one thing I would look for that they could throw out there. If you see a cover zero blitz, Ohio State never has cover zero blitz. Knowles likes to include it because, like, if you're going to threaten pressure, he wants to occasionally bring everyone instead of like always dropping people out, because you got to make the offense prepare for it. And so, he's not allowed. We know he's not allowed to like participate in practice. He's obviously like not calling the game. That said, I would be surprised if he hasn't at least had some input or given some thoughts or like they probably wanted to take advantage of the 15 practices they got to at least get a little bit of a head start, you would think. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw that, or, as I said, like someone like a Zach Harrison or Jack Sawyer doing a variety of things, dropping into coverage in different ways. It's more similar to how he likes to use that weak side defensive end position that Knowles calls a Leo.
So what to you is the biggest key for this defense that's going to determine, there are happy Ohio State fans on New Year's night, or there are unhappy Ohio State fans on New Year's night? Like what's the biggest key for Ohio State basically not having the Michigan game again?
I was going to say not give up like 6 yards a carry. Is that too easy?
This is why he's the expert, folks. Go.
I think you've got to find a way to force Utah behind schedule. And like, even if, as I said, I imagine almost Ohio State maybe going overboard the other way. And like, we are going to be super heavy up front. I would, to our previous graphic, like I wouldn't be surprised if they put Ronnie Hickman in the box quite a bit and play 8-man fronts, bring in Kate Stover to have a linebacker, play even, just really try to force Utah to have to get in some third and longs and throw the ball to beat them. I mean, that's what I was saying too, like with the stack look, like just throwing some different things at Utah's blocking scheme to throw them off and get free hitters. Because, if Cam Rising, beats them throwing the football, you tip your hat to him. But like, the first thing I'd be worrying about is the run game. And the second thing is the quarterback run. So I think that's where you kind of have to start.
Really quickly, just to touch on the other side of the ball just for a minute. It seems like if Utah is vulnerable, and people heard this on yesterday's Morning Scoop with Josh Furlong from KSL.com, if there's a spot they're vulnerable, it's probably on the back end. We talked about the fact that maybe missing or banged up kind of outside corners on both sides of the field potentially. But of course, Ohio State missing two of their best receivers. So with Olave and Wilson out, how would you try and attack the Utah defense?
Yeah, and I think you still have to be who you are. You can't like change just because those guys are not playing. I mean, there's plenty of hype, obviously, to the guys who are replacing them. And so, they all have some experience to varying degrees. So I think you're obviously going to really lean heavily on Jackson Smith-Njigba. But, I think you kind of just run your offense, vertical stems, comebacks especially to Fleming and Harrison, take advantage of keeping ahead of the chains. And then, I think they do need to run the football better than they did towards the end of the season. And, I think with Thayer Munford left tackle and Matt Jens left guard, somewhat ironically, I think they probably have better run blocking offensive line. But I think they'll look for different ways to run the football and even maybe, use Stroud in short yardage or near the goal line as a runner.
I've been going in circles on this game and what to expect. Ohio State obviously has more talent, but with the opt-outs, the injuries, they're obviously pretty thin in spots. It doesn't seem like this is necessarily a great matchup for Ohio State stylistically based on what we saw at Michigan, but how involved is Jim Knowles? How much different is the personnel going to be? It's such a different team, maybe, but we don't know. So, with all of that set up, how do you see this game playing out?
Yeah, and it's not snowing, so they got that. Hopefully, it's been raining all week in Southern California, but it's not snowing at least. So I actually, the person I haven't mentioned, we haven't discussed yet, CJ Stroud. I actually think he's really poised to play really well. I think, in some ways he continued to get better as the season went on, and I think this will be a big stage for him. And so I certainly don't expect Ohio State's defense to shut them down, but I do expect, I'm expecting Ohio State to score 35 plus points, something like a 37-27 game.
Yeah, I said in one of the Buckeye Weekly shows earlier this week, I don't know what the score is going to be, but I will pretty much guarantee that Utah has somewhere between 27 and 31 points. It's like they're not going to shut them out. They're not going to blow them out. They're going to be right there. And it's just, can Ohio State score more than 31 points? If they can, they probably win. If they can't, they probably lose. So yeah, this is going to be a really interesting matchup. There's just so many storylines here. And, I mean, everyone wants to tell you that, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like it is still the Rose Bowl. You will turn on the TV and all of a sudden, deep in your heart, you will know it is the Rose Bowl. Of course it matters.
It don't matter. It don't matter if I say loses. Trust me, there won't be a bunch of people afterwards saying, "Oh, that was fun playing Twiddlywinks today," and can't wait till next year. People will be upset.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely going to be a hopefully everyone can enjoy a win as much as they would not enjoy a loss, depending on which of the outcomes happens today. But it should be. Yeah. It should be a fun day. Always a beautiful setting. The forecast is just about perfect, and as Ross said, it has been raining all week, but it's not going to rain today. It is New Year's Day in Pasadena. Somewhere in the back of my head, I'm hearing Keith Jackson's voice right now. I'm sure if you were a certain age, you were doing it as well. I cannot wait. It is one of my favorite places to watch a sporting event, literally anywhere in the world. Cannot wait. We are going to have loads of coverage from Pasadena today. We'll have a pregame show. We'll have a postgame show. We may have more than one pregame show. We're still working on some of that stuff, but should be a lot to talk about. Tony Gerdeman, Kevin Newton, and I will be there. I hear a rumor that someone else on staff may be there. I don't know if you've heard anything about that, Ross, but
maybe it's we'll see how traffic on the I guess the 5 or the 15 maybe is that morning, and see what happens.
Yeah. As Ross's San Diego Padres hat may have been a tip off. Ross is a Southern California person, so we may just see Ross in person at the stadium today. That would be a load of fun. Yeah. And we'll have photos and videos and all sorts of coverage and all sorts of interviews and all that good stuff. It'll all be at BuckeyeScoop.com, and all those pregame shows, obviously on youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. Hit that thumbs up button for us. That helps other folks find these shows, and also hit that bell. That'll get you notified as soon as we go live on pregame and postgame and all that stuff, and streaming interviews after the game. That'll all be youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. And also make sure you check out all of our great podcasts. There's been a ton of coverage this week. I'm sure everyone's sitting around their house today going, maybe looking for the Advil, but also going, boy, there's a long time till the game starts. I wish I had something to help pass the time. Well, we've done about 47 hours worth of podcasts this week. That's an approximate number, but it feels about right. So there's lots of stuff to listen to, lots of stuff to watch. You can find us on our whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Just search for Buckeye Scoop. You'll find all those shows. You can also find youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Find them all there. And we will be out in Pasadena in just a little bit. We cannot wait. Hope you guys can join us, and we will talk to you a little bit later on.